Afternoon to you all. It's good to be back with you again in this new year, and we have another art workshop from Philip Snow for you today. Thank you once again to Philip for doing this for us. I shall hand over to him now. He's going to be continuing with the drawing birds in landscapes, if I am correct. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, William. Welcome all. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Just turn that volume up a bit. Right. Okay. Well, I'm not doing a PowerPoint type thing today. I'm just going to show you a few examples and then we will go into the drawing after just about 5 minutes or so. So I'll just change cameras and try and get this camera straight. Hope you've all got the sheet. Anyway, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of my own paintings in composition. And this is a combination. It was to show a very distinctive landscape and a very distinctive bird. So this is the marsh harrier. This is the marsh. This is Cley in Norfolk, famous for its flint architecture. So I'm showing the scenery, the architecture, the landscape and the bird, and trying to use familiar colors to bring them all together. That's one example, and two slightly different examples here. This is an osprey in a glassland near Porthmadog, and it's actually quite a long illustration. And I can't actually show you the end of it because my camera stand is in the way. But this is a very long, narrow painting with the bird cutting diagonally across the horizontals. If you remember, if you've done the workshops before, you know, I'm a great fan of the golden section, a line vertically down about a third along and about a third across, either towards the top or the bottom. But looking at that sort of landscape, I've done it in a slightly different way here. So this is a shorter, that's Snowdon again in the background with an osprey and the Glaslyn River. And it's less emphasis on the bird, more emphasis on the landscape. So as you probably gathered, a lot of my work is birds in landscape. Now I'll have to, I can't show you the whole thing because of the way the camera is, but eventually after selling the original for this painting, when I got the digital copy, I got rid of this red kite and the landscape looks far better. Now, I can't find another print of it. I've just been looking. It looks far better with just one red kite. There you've got two centers of attention. This is looking down on Cadair Idris, by the way. You've got two centers of attention, which kind of takes your focus away. But someone bought the painting anyway, so they liked it. On the other hand, you've got something like this, which is very much a bird. God, this is terrible. I hadn't realized I wouldn't be able to show you the whole pictures because the camera stand is quite short. But this, believe it or not, this bird is taking up, almost 2/3 of the painting. Then we've got other long paintings like this. This is Aberdaron, in which the birds are more or less secondary to the whole landscape. That's where I started my painting career, by the way, in this craft shop in Aberdaron, if you're ever down there. That's in Carnarvonshire. And I love these long compositions. You see that this came third in the British Birds magazine Bird Illustrator of the Year award. and they said they liked this drawing as much as any that were entered that year, although I only came third. And but what I had to take into account was you had to work out the length of the heron's legs compared with the length of the palings here on the fence, and make the heron almost a part of the long composition. So I love these long compositions. So what we're going to do now is not a very long composition. We're going to draw this one. And I hope you've all got your sheets there. And so a little bit of fiddling here. Fiddle, fiddle, fiddle. Anyway, I had it straight earlier on. This is quite, sorry, I know it's frustrating for you. It's frustrating for me. That's better. So we look at this, if you look at your sheets, you'll see it's basically, it's 3 lines. It's 3 lines of landscape with a zigzag. The zigzag is taking your eye into the landscape. It's actually Carnarvonshire, looking at it from Anglesey. So roughly, remember that we're working on these thirds, roughly a third along, a third down, and a third down here. You've basically got 3 lines. So we want the background line to go across, and you can do your own shapes of mountains here as simple as possible. And we'll just leave it as simple as that at the moment. And then when we look at the middle line, that is going to be approximately halfway down the page. So you'll see that it's a line of island, a headland and a line of islands. But we want the headland to overlap the background, because these are lines of landscape coming towards us, going to get stronger as they come towards us. We want them to overlap. Again, it's a fairly simple shape for a headland. And then there's a small island. Doesn't matter if they're not the same size and shape as the one on the sheet that I've given you. Hopefully you all got the sheet via email. And then if we look again, we've got almost like a spearhead. This is the shore, the sand and the mud coming in to the estuary. And again, we want that to slightly overlap. So we want that to go about, not quite to about here. So again, it's simplifying it. It's that sort of shape. Or you can crop a bit off there. We want a bit more. We want a bit more of the estuary showing. But this headland on this side, we want it in between the small island and the shore. We want it on a line here. So we just draw a rough line like that. You see the way we've got that going in, that going in, that going in, and that going in to give this zigzag effect. In fact, that, if you look on the sheets, we've got a lower. I made a mistake there. We'll have that lower. We don't want that too high, because that's, we're trying to, if you can imagine, we're looking into the landscape like so. Roughly speaking, we're looking at 33 degrees high into the landscape. Now this headland is a little bit different. We'll put a bit of character into this one, but we want it to overlap the background one. So you can see already what we've got is the basic shape reduced to three layers, as it were. And also we're bringing the estuary, round. In fact, I've added this little bit of curve here to give it more of that sense of going into the estuary. And we'll leave the background fairly simple. If what I would do on a sketch is to shade it like that, and this is a 2B pencil, so it looks on the screen, it looks fairly grey because I want it to stay in the background. This will be stronger. Now, if you look at your sheet, you'll see I've done some cliffs here, quite simple. These are rocky bits with grass on the top, and then cliffs here with grass on the top as well. So if you were painting this later on, the cliffs would be a greyish sort of colour in the islands with a pale browny green, and then the mountains in the background would be a blue-grey. So these cliffs, very simplifying them. You notice that, they're not equal. And we're strengthening the bottom. As I'm sure you're all seaside experts, you'll know that when the tide is in, you get this black algae, lichen at the foot of the cliffs. And when the tide is out, below that black line is actually a silvery line of barnacles down to the seaweed. But with the tide in, you've usually got the black line, the black lichen along the bottom of the rocks. So we just rub that bit of background out there and do this a bit stronger. We want this to stand out from the background. And the same on the little islet. An islet, as the islets get further out into the sea, you get less and less grass growing on the top of them. And we'll bring this cliff around here a bit. And again, you'll see the darker line around the bottom of the cliffs. Not so much here because the tide only comes up that high up the cliffs about once a month. And just vague cliff shapes. There are lots of cracks in the cliffs and a few bits and layers of rocks sticking through. And we're doing these stronger. As we're getting closer towards us. And also you get a line, you get the tide line, which is usually dried seaweed, things like that. And again, the grass on the top. Of course, I'm making these stronger when you're using colours. The colours will give the contrast with the background. Because if I was painting this, the background hills would not have a line around them. This would be almost a solid but very pale blue-grey to help the recession going into the background, as it were. So also along here, you're going to have a bit of a tide line, because of course the tide has a different height, something like twice a month. Some of the tides could come right up here. The tide line would be right up here. And twice a month, the tide line would be quite low down. So it's this dried strand of weed and what have you moves up and down the beach with the different tides. And of course, that's a great place for beach combing, finding all the different things, wonderful things you find on a beach, as well as all the plastic rubbish, of course, unfortunately. So that, and as this, you will notice that this was called Drawing Birds in Landscape. I'm just going to put in a small gull here. If you look on your sheet, you will see a single gull just there. Now, what is important is you don't want to put a massive gull here, because if you put a massive gull here, you've got to have its shadow or its reflection in the water. And this landscape is too small scale to allow for a massive gull. So you've got to think of how big these rocks are here and put a small bird, very little more than that. And that's a pretty crummy small bird. Just refine that a little. The gull, it looks very dark at the head. It's a black-headed gull already. They're starting to get their blackheads already for the spring. So that you could have possibly a heron stood here, but you'd have to look at the size of the rocks, and a heron stood there would only be about that big, something like that. And it wouldn't look like a penguin like that one does, but it would be about that size. So that would be, in fact, that's too big. I'm just looking at the proportions on my own drawing. It would be smaller. It would only be about that size. Now, if you wanted to be really clever, you could do a heron here, and that would be about that size. And that allows you to, that you can imagine then this in reality would be about 80 yards, if you want to be accurate about it. So that's the first example. Now, that's actually, just for the record, that's Aberfrau. And this is the Llyn Peninsula, Carnarvonshire. So I'll move on to example number 2. I'm just getting my Jubilee clip. I'm actually going to adapt. We've just done one landscape. I'm going to adapt this one to make it longer. If you imagine this twice the size, but the background is this, you can really use your imagination here, because we're going to use, I think I said in the blurb, crescents. So we're going to do overlapping waves, and where they overlap, they're going to form distinct areas, which you can then color individually later on if you so like. So we're going to vary the waves. It's quite a rough sea, and then overlap them. As I say, these are going to be individually like that. You can literally do them any shape at all, just following these crescent-like lines, and try not to make them even, different shapes between them. And then there's a high bit there, and maybe a little one just there. So that will be a basis. And I say, because I'm drawing these darker now so that they stand out, you can draw these as palely as you like. And all these can be, for instance, if you want to color it later on, if you imagine these all different shades of blue and green, light and dark. So you want some dark bits and we'll do a bit of that in a minute. We're going to put a much simplified tern. Now, terns are quite long-winged, sharp-winged, and they've got sharp tails and sharp beaks as well. They're quite elegant. So again, we're roughly doing the third thing, if you remember. We'll do that. So where the thirds overlap, well, basically, I'm going to do it like this before I draw it. This is basically an elongated M shape, and it's a slightly diagonal. Imagine a diagonal line. We don't want it. You could put it vertical if you like, but it's a slight diagonal. So if you very carefully, to begin with, draw out a flat M shape like that. It's a very flattened M shape. I don't want it too near the bottom there or too near the top. And then we want to more or less draw parallel lines to the front of the wing, and then a sharper point to the end of the wing, like so. I'll make that narrower, actually. I've made that a bit too wide there. Now, as this is going to get more complex here, I'm going to rub out the C behind the tern. So we've got a cleaner space. Now, the body of the tern is, just rub that bit there. The body of the tern, very roughly speaking, is a kind of what you might call a long float shape, or a slight, people say cigar shape, but I've never seen a cigar that shape. I think, roughly speaking, they're both coming to a point. So that's the sort of shape that you want. Now, you might remember, if you've done any of the classes where we, I'll rub those bits, where we did flying birds, remember I always described the tail usually as a sort of cheese shape, a wodge of cheese, because a lot of birds have a rounded end to the tail. Of course, a common tern doesn't. A common tern has a sharp end of the tail. And if it were an Arctic tern, you'd have very long tail spines, or a swallow. And by the way, we still have 3 swallows here on Anglesey that just have never left. So although I don't believe in man-made global warming, we can certainly see climate change. So the head, we're doing another lozenge shape, spear shape, whatever you want to call it, because the tern, virtually all terns have, the top of the head is black. The beaks vary in size and shape and color, but the top of the head is usually black, and quite a sharp little beak. That's quite a big beak, so I'd make that slightly thinner. Of course, I'm using quite a big, thick pencil so that it stands out, and add a bit more to the breast there. So that's your basic tern shape. Just do the top of the head black there. And the common tern actually has a black tip to the bill, but we'll just do a little bit there. Now the back, all of this is a pale grey colour. Make that slightly wider. So I'm doing the same light shading I did for the mountains. And terns usually have the outer primaries dark. They all vary slightly So we've got a rather distorted looking turn there. It's better if I can. So I'm just fiddling with the camera here. Sorry about this. Very awkward too. Oh, stop it. Sorry. I do apologize. Oh, yeah. Really is awkward. Oh dear. So the camera tripod has come loose. Well, that's more accurate. And a little bit of body under here. That's where you see the feet usually. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use some different blues and greens. I'm just going to use some crayons here. We look at these. These are different blue and green crayons. So the background is going to be bluer. And it will get greener the closer it comes to us, because the sea is usually bluer further out and greener in the shallows. So I'm going to do just a few different shapes. This blue in the background, and a slightly different blue. Actually doesn't look that different, but it's and on my screen it actually looks quite grey, but it's not. It's quite blue. If you're using thicker paper, you could do this in paint later on if you like. Now I'm going to do this blue here because I'm going to put the green over the top of it. And now I'm going to use this greenish color. So half of that is actually going over the top of the blue to give you a blue-green, of course. Put a little bit of it on that. The harder you press, or the you want to leave it, the outline of the bird, outline it as strong as possible. Now put this green here all over the foreground. Then put a darker blue and a darker green on the top of that. So I'm going to use a darker blue now, and this point's a bit too sharp. If you're doing shading, you're better off with a rounded point. There's a different type of crayon to the others. You see it works nicely with the green. That's disgraceful. He's gone over the lines. Whoa. Now, and in the foreground, I'm going to add a stronger green. It's actually too strong, but I'm going to go over the top of the other one. And then over all of them. As you put in the colors over the top of all of them, you're bringing the blues together, you're bringing the blues and greens together and making the whole thing more harmonious. So some of the greens have got blues under them, some of the blues have got greens under them, a little bit into the background. So you've got, hopefully, and just to really add the icing on the cake, little red feet, little red beak. Now I'm afraid on this camera that looks pretty gross, but it'll give you an idea of the sorts of things you can do with simple shapes and simple people like me. Right, now, what have we got next? Yes, you can go away. Oh. Right, we've got, well, I think we'll do a, yes, do a vertical one. Right, well, I'm just, so what we'll actually do is this island. It shows you how you can change the compositions. I've often cut paintings in half if I didn't like half of it. So we're going to do this island with the background there. Again, this is going to be the main, take that away. Again, a third of the way down, third of the way across. So the main part of the composition is going to be vertically a pyramid. I think I mentioned pyramid in the blurb. It's a pyramidal shape with a lighthouse on it. Or it could be a castle on a hill or whatever. Just rub that little bit out there. And this needs to be slightly leaning, like so. Very simple lighthouse. Of course, this hasn't actually you might actually wonder where the light is. It's not visible from this side of the, and the island. If you look at the island, I'm not showing the other, I'll show a slight bit of the, and we'll just simplify this. We don't want it completely the same shape. And it has a zigzag line of steps going down just simplify them like that. Actually has a little wall and a gate around it. Now, if you will put the sea level about there, that means the mountains in the background. We don't want the mountains in the background higher than the lighthouse, just for the sake of composition, so that it adds to this sort of feeling. So we do that. And that also follows the slope of the roof there on the side of the lighthouse. So we're keeping this pyramid-like composition. I'll just show you that bit again. You see we've changed it quite a bit, but it doesn't matter. This is all about playing with nature. Now we've got a line. We've also got 2 lines of islands, and they, as on the other time, they will vary. That's a headland, a couple of islands here. Don't make them all the same shape. There can be different shapes. And then round here, we've got the bay. So we do a line like so. That kind of echoes that. So you've got a crescent shape throughout the composition. Crescent shape with the vertical thrusting through it. And then we'll echo that in the bottom of the hill here. And if you look at the drawings, you'll see that there are rocks here, which again, they echo. We want them overlapping. We want a series of crescent-like shapes, central, around the central, the main subject. So we draw a simple wall up here. And the steps, I'm not going to, you see they're quite big steps compared with the size of the lighthouse. They'll have to be half that size. Otherwise the people would be giants. Couldn't get into the lighthouse. I'll add a bit of cliff there and a bit of cliff here. If you're familiar with the coast, you'll know that you get the rocky outcrops with the grassy slopes between them. Or not just the coast, of course, the Sussex Downs and what have you. You get lines of cliffs. So it's a combination of rock. This is obviously a cliff. It's too steep. But they are, again, we want everything in the composition to go in and up, as it were, to follow that contour line. We won't do anything down here for the minute. Now, for this one, we won't fill in this bit and do it. That same sort of shading in the sky, because it will contrast with the lighthouse. And this one has a simple roof on it. It doesn't have a light on the top. So we've already got a bit of contrast there, but we want shading on the side of the lighthouse to give it a bit more, give that lighthouse a three-dimensional. So you've got shading on that side. You're going to have shading on this side of the hill. And we have shading up that side of the steps. Now, I'm putting some of the, again, to give this feeling, this three-dimensional feeling, so that it doesn't go from black to white. It gives you more contrast. So that's the main subject of the drawing. It's quite strong. So now we can fill in the rocks, almost as dark as the island. And on this side, now, as this is a bay, the tide, this is not only the source of light coming in this way, this is the source of the westerly winds. This is based on Clandrin Island here on Anglesey, by the way. Any of you familiar with Anglesey? Although it's not as tall as this. But that doesn't matter. This is all about making up things which are nevertheless possible. They're not impossible physically. They're all possible. And it's up to us to suggest these different forms, but to be consistent. So the waves are going to come into the bay. Again, they're like crescents. It's not as overlapping as on the turns thing. But as the waves go away, they become fainter and less defined. So the waves are only strong near the shore. So they're going up, getting further apart. They're helping to suggest distance, going into the distance. And I've only just realized that this doesn't have a bird on it at all. So what I'm going to do here is we're doing a little bit of background here. As you see, this has got various rocks in the foreground. Now this down here, this is sand dunes. Put another rock there. Because the shadow here, this side of the hill, will have shade. So that will give it, this is the beach down here. This will give it, we'll fade this out down here, but it will ground this in the composition. And because we've got this feeling of going up into the painting, into the drawing, we'll put the main subject down here. So what you're most liable to need a slightly sharper pencil. What we're most likely to find on a rock here is a stone chat. And so a stone chat is going to be quite, you look at these rocks, a stone chat's only going to be about so big. It's going to have a black head and a black tail. And that's going to be the stone chat. This is reddish, orangey breast. And so we want to suggest these rocks are going to have usual splits in them, and they're going to be darker on this side. So we can fill this in completely dark. And then we want the pale edge of the rocks. This is grass down here. A lot of these rocks are quite silvery. They're silvery granites. So we're leaving this side of the rocks quite distinctive in a contrast. And of course the splits, you get these splits in the rocks, quite arbitrary, the way that they've cooled down. But this, I'm making this quite a lot stronger to contrast with the rocks in the background, and the same here. This is called, well, I call it cornering. What it's doing, it's grounding the drawing, giving the solidity in the corners so that it's giving strength, it's grounding the whole thing in that composition. Put a bit more grass there just to fill that. So these are quite strong, quite dark shadows. And then we'll just strengthen this a bit to make this stand out a bit more. And these need to be, these are more silvery. We won't go into a lot of detail there. And this beach needs to be just a little bit of shading on it. So there's a, oh dear. Strange how this camera distorts everything. He says it really does. I really will have to get a better camera. He will get a better camera. He will, yeah, sometimes soon. So we'll leave that one there for now and do the final one. Now last time we did a type of heron, didn't we? Well, I'm trying to find can't find my sheet from last time, but we did we'll do something like this now. We'll just do that's right, we did a long, narrow one, if I recall, but I'll just come down a bit. There we are. Almost square. So again, taking the 1/3 thing down here and 1/3 up. That means the main body of the heron is going to be here. So it's going to be an egg shape. We want it to be about 1/4 of the size of the paper. An egg shape, more pointed towards the bottom. So it's a razorbill or guillemot egg. I'm sure you know that razorbill and guillemot eggs are more pointed so that they don't roll off the cliffs. What a clever designer we have. And remember last time, I think we did this kind of S shape here. Do this very faintly because you can go over it. And there we have, there's the basics, slightly too long beak. The basics of a heron. So we want to do the neck behind this. So if you do that, again, very pale. And then up around the top. And then along like so. And that, make that the tail and the wings sticking out of the bottom there, make that slightly longer. Just get rid of that line. Thicken the beak. Now the eye is going to be here. And as this is a heron and not an egret, it has a black plume like that, like a thick eyebrow. And it goes up just to above the eye, like that. Now we'll strengthen this, make this slightly more angular. And at the front, it has these beautiful frond-like feathers. And we're going to make this more angular at the back as well, because they have this kink in the neck is an absolute incredible piece of design. It is almost like a catapult. It means they can stab with the beak at incredible speed and velocity, because this is almost like a hinge, like a catapult. Again, they also have these lovely frondy feathers on the back, which they put out in display, especially in the spring. You'll see this on the heronries. Now the legs are always the most difficult. This is the center of balance, almost along the 1/3. But if you put the leg straight down, that would be inaccurate. The leg starts up here inside. Remember, we've looked a little bit at, oh, sorry, that's next month's magazine and the months after. We'll go into the skeletal issues. So the leg comes out and then it comes down to here, but it's actually bent from the spine. So it will go in the water under there, and that will be underneath the center of balance. But the leg itself is hinged up there. And conveniently, we've got the feet in the water. We don't have to draw the feet, which is the hardest thing of all. We could do a little bit of additional feathers. A very strong thing in a heron, it's these black feathers here, because those are actually on the chest, but the heron always folds his wings underneath that black bit. So the wings are grey, and the tail and the end feathers. And this bit under here is usually black, and a few more feathery bits. Just rub out that bit. Now we're looking at this particular one. We've got I'm going to do the reeds roughly. They're going with similar shapes to the C shapes. They're going to be overlapping. So we're making a pattern of overlapping shapes. Make them as many as you like. Just not going to take the reed bed right the way across. In reality, there would be a lot more reeds than this. But you notice they are. I'll just rub out the line along the top. We're not going to have a line along the top, but we are going to have the feathery heads probably know they have these feathery heads, the reed beds. Especially at this time of the year, they're quite pale. In the summer, they are beautiful purple, and the reeds are green. This time of the year, everything is a kind of golden brown. And so we've got that. Let's say in reality, the top here would be solid reeds. So here we've got the idea, and here reflections coming down to the reflections because they're mirror images. Are all going the opposite way. And we'll just darken the bottom, strengthen the bottom of these. So once again, we're outlining, slightly outlining the heron. A couple of fronds down there, just strengthen those bits so that it stands out from the background. Oh, it's funny. That beak is too fat at the end. I have to make it more dagger-like. I'm sure William will tell you that the Greek for dagger is makai, and that's what Peter had. He didn't have a sword, he had a dagger, makai. I'm sure he'll confirm that later and tell me how to pronounce it as well. Makai, dagger, not sword. So I shall say that is about it for today. We've got 4 very different things there. I hope have taught us something, excuse me, about composition, about how you can have large birds in small landscapes and small birds in large landscapes, and upside down ones as well. Something like that. So I will now hand back to William, and hope that you've all enjoyed that. I'll have a drink.
Thank you, Philip.
Right.
I don't know whether anybody would like to show their pictures, if there's anybody who's brave enough.
There's usually a few. Well, has anybody got any questions? I know it's remember also, of course, you can also address questions via William, via email. Endless questions, all bring them in. Or you want to see more examples of this or that, I can send pictures via email. All very welcome to ask about anything really to do with birds and art and design and illustration. No reply was the strong answer. Right.
If anybody does come up with any questions, then as Philip says, do feel free to drop me an email.
Oh yes. Anything about birds, actually.
Yeah.
Good.
That's good.
Thank you, Julia.
I was just going to say that this session's been recorded on YouTube, so hopefully I'll send out the link on Monday next week or some time like that,
Right.
so you can watch it back. And people who
And Ben, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Yes. It was, actually, I mean, please tell us if I was going too fast. That's the other, because in the past, some of you have actually done more than I've done in the session. So it's difficult to know. But if some of you think I'm going too fast, please, you can comment. You say you can do it later by email as well. Oh, yes, please. Yes, please show yours. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ah, amazing. That's wonderful. That's good. Yeah.
That's not just that page. It's not
No,
just
no.
that page. Part
Oh,
of that
that's
page.
good. Oh, yes. Yes.
That's the first bit.
Yeah.
I did it on the second page.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Good. Good. Even more. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. You can climb those steps. Yes. And more. Good. Good. I'm just looking at the one on top of the wardrobe, trying to figure out what it is. Right. Very good. I say, be quite happy to, if you colour them later on, that's you can have fun with the different colours. I think there's another thing I advise as well. If you scan and print some of yours out on thicker paper, you can colour them and experiment. Print a drawing out 2 or 3 different times and try different colours on it, either pencils or with watercolour or gouache or acrylic or whatever. So it means you can use your drawings more than once and experiment.
Without worrying about having ruined your own.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And hopefully we'll arrange another meeting at some point in February, another art workshop. And we'll let you know about that as the time comes. And we shall say goodbye for today. Was that you?
That was me, yes. Sorry about that. Some piece of mechanics here, technology. Yeah. Yes, thank you all.